Yo, parish orphans and retrogrades. I'm joined by my friend Dr. Edmund Mazza today to discuss Francis's ex-ante doppelganger, Cardinal Martini, the man who would be Pope, the man who is supposed to be Pope. As a matter of fact, Dr. Mazza, if not for one word, one single word, we would have a Martini pontificate, a shrewder, craftier, more charismatic man doing the exact same things Francis has chosen to do. Francis is actually a fill-in for Martini, if not for this one word. And that one word is Parkinson's. A Parkinson's diagnosis of Cardinal Martini revealed in 2002 meant that the people that gave us Cardinal Martini, that gave us Francis, eventually would have to surrogate Francis for Martini. We're going to examine your evidence, Dr. Mazza, and you have a lot of it. I listened to a lecture from you on Christmas Eve that was really, really impressive. And I think you'll be able to make the case for us here today. But anyway, Happy New Year, Merry Christmas, and thanks for being with me once again.
Oh, it's a pleasure, Timothy. Happy New Year and Merry Christmas. And if I'm a little awkward today, it's because I lost my lucky turkey bone and I no longer have access to the Great Western Grandmother.
Right. Yeah, Pachamama, is it? A kind of
No,
Pachamama of sorts, which is thematically on point today. So don't be awkward.
okay.
We'll I don't even know if one should joke of such things, but there's always the great Earth Mother. No, I can't even make that joke. There is no great Earth Mother, but don't be awkward. No need, because never fear. We are going to get to the root of things today, and I think it's going to be a heck of a show. First, I would just make this quick plug. This time of the year last year, I think it was January, I got kicked off of Patreon for teaching Catholic sex ethics on a YouTube video and not backing down when Patreon said, take these 3 videos or 2 videos off of YouTube. So since then, I have divided between Locals and Subscribestar. They're attached to this video. And at the beginning of the year, parish orphans or retrogrades, I need you to go to Locals or Subscribestar, pick one, and support this program on either. If you want to do so, if you want to help this program, the same way lots of people supported us on Patreon, we're conscientious objectors. We could not take the videos down in good faith. I said, whatever. I'm used to taking baths, monetary baths, for principle. And that was the same in January of 2023. So go to Locals or Subscribestar today. Also, go to realestateforlife.org and get out of your blue state, get to a red state. Realestateforlife.org will help you do it. All right. That's enough. So, Dr. Edmund Mazza, was Cardinal Martini the Francis the First that Bergoglio became? Was he supposed to be that, if not for, but for a Parkinson's diagnosis in 2002, which changed the entire destiny of, well, Francis and Martini? They probably didn't change the destiny of the church, because your argument is, and the people that have looked at this, like Julia Maloney, who I'm going to be citing some of her work today, it's the exact same pontificate, just a less charismatic, less crafty form that we would have gotten under Martini. Am I right?
Absolutely. The Pope splainers would try to justify these unorthodox statements that come out of Bergoglio's mouth with numbing regularity and try to explain it away. But how do you explain it away when this has been regurgitated before by someone who was a known dissenter and a heretic? I mean, let's call things what they are, right? In 1999, as early as 1999, I can give you a quote from Martini, who was the Archbishop of Milan, in which he listed those things. Well, it's his dream. He said, I had a dream It's funny. We're the Martin Luther King Day is coming up Monday the 15th. I'm actually going to have a 3-hour seminar, Popes, Prophecies, and Anti-Popes. Folks can go to edmundmazza.com and enroll. But Martini had a dream, and he said what the key issues for the collegial and authoritative exchange among all the bishops, the key issues should be the shortage of ordained ministers, the role of woman in society and in the church, the discipline of marriage, the Catholic vision of sexuality, penitential practices, relations with the sister churches of Orthodoxy, and more in general, the need to revive ecumenical hopes, the relationship between democracy and values and between civil laws and the moral law. So that's 1999 at some synod of bishops where he gave his dream. And I think it's fair to say Bergoglio is fulfilling his dream.
Yeah, I'm looking at this is a combination mashup of works put together by Mrs. Maloney, Julia Maloney, who's a friend of this show. And what she cites is either the last years of the 20th century, the late 90s, or the first years of the 21st century, 0102, before Martini's revelation of his Parkinson's diagnosis in 2002, where he said, I will have to step down. We're going to have to get a new Martini. Hadn't he been on the Time magazine cover as the anti-pope, the next pope? Well, Martini spoke in this setting I'm talking about, late 90s, early 2000s, of his incoming program for the next pope, whether it was him or someone else. I'm citing Miss Maloney. Decentralizing the church. Synodality, it is often called decentralizing the church, according to Francis. New answers the Pope would, quote unquote, have to give on sex ethics, communion for the divorced and civilly remarried, and the question of the diaconate for women. Does that sound familiar, anybody? Are we having fun yet? Are we? This is absolutely programmatic. It is programmatic, which is a term that doesn't get used often enough here in America. It's a term the Europeans like, European academics, but it means that it's a design according to a program. And Francis has played the playbook. When he essentially became the surrogate for Martini, Martini had built this group around himself called the St. Gallen Mafia. They started meeting in 1996. 6 years later, in 2002, he realized he was too sick going into the conclave that would be, it eventuated in 2005. And so they started looking for a Martini replacement. And it is allegedly, according to Miss Maloney and according to Austin Ivory, the Pope's very biographer, in a recent article, I think 2017, that it was not Martini, but it was Cardinal Cormac Murphy O'Connor, who was having a conversation with Austin Ivory, who was his secretary at the time. And he said, around this time when they realized they're going to have to switch out Martini for Bergoglio. This is a fact. Well, what do you know about the Cardinal from Buenos Aires? He's the guy that can get this done. That's not part of the direct quote, but he's the guy that can get this done is the subtext. What do you say, Ed?
Yeah, I mean, we can just go through quotes from Martini and see that Bergoglio is just spouting Martini quotes in his own words. As you point out, he was sick with Parkinson's in 2002, and Martini died in September of 2012.
Yeah.
And just before he died, he gave his sort of last testament, his interview. And I can give you an English translation. And let's just pick the topic of communion for the divorced and remarried. This is a quote from Martini, one of the last things he said before he went to his eternal judgment. Quote, "Who are the sacraments for? The sacraments are not an instrument of discipline, but a help for people in their journey and in the weaknesses of their life. Are we carrying the sacraments to the people who need new strength? I think of all the divorced and remarried couples to extended families. They need special protection. The attitude we hold towards extended families determines the ability of the church to be close to their children. A woman, for instance, is abandoned by her husband and finds a new companion who takes care of her and her 3 children. This second love succeeds. If this family is discriminated against, not only is the mother cut out from the church, but also her children. And of course, and this is me talking, by discrimination, of course, Martini is referring to the fact that if they are having sexual relations, they're not allowed to receive Holy Communion. And he finishes by saying this, quote, "If the parents feel like they're outside the church and don't feel its support," notice he keeps repeating the word feel, right?
Yeah.
It's feelings-based theology here, and don't feel its support, the church will lose the future generation. Before communion, we pray, "Lord, I am not worthy." We know we're not worthy. Love is a grace. Love is a gift. The question of whether the divorced can receive communion ought to be turned around. How can the church reach people who have complicated family situations, bringing them help with the power of the sacraments? That is Amoris Laetitia right there, right?
Yeah. That's the whole point of Amoris Laetitia, is that paragraph right there. It explicates it better than Francis did in Amoris Laetitia. He had to, in a serpentine way, in a labyrinthine way, a deliberately semi-vague way, slip in and out of body text and footnotes all throughout chapter 8 of Amoris Laetitia to explicate that precise point. What he actually explicated doesn't make any sense in Amoris Laetitia. This is the proposition with its justification in Martini's script, and it makes far more sense.
And it's almost word for word what you repeated from Casper a few shows ago, where Casper came up with this, example, right? The train example to, about the woman who's in a new relationship and blah, 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 right?
Right. Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Now, what people have to understand is that Cardinal Casper, Cormac Murphy O'Connor, who's the one that used to work with Austin Ivory, he kind of bequeathed Austin Ivory to Francis when Bergoglio became Pope, and Cardinal Carl Lehman, all became cardinals in February of 2001 with Bishop Bergoglio at the time, who became Cardinal Bergoglio. And of course, shortly thereafter, they would all make the formal shift from the Sankt Gallen papacy will be a Francis papacy, a Bergoglio Francis papacy, not a Martini Francis papacy. Martini probably would have picked Francis as a name too. Isn't that kind of spooky? So, so when you talk about Martini, who was dead by the time his vision was achieved, he died in 2012. The Francis pontificate that he was supposed to head began a year later to 8 months later. Bergoglio became Pope Francis. And so Cardinal Martini, who'd been sick with Parkinson's for 10 years before expiring and going to his eternal judgment, was not his main advisor, even though he was he was the Don. He was in charge of Bergoglio. He was in charge of Cormac Murphy O'Connor. He was in charge of Cardinal Lehman. He was in charge of Cardinal Casper. He'd been a cardinal for a long time. These guys were all new together, Bergoglio, Casper, Murphy O'Connor, and Lehman, in February of 2001. Did you know that, Ed? They all became cardinals at the same time? Because, yeah, this
No, I
kind of...
hadn't known that particular aspect. No. And so we've talked about divorced for the communion for the divorced and remarried. How about this quote? And see if you haven't heard this before. See if this isn't deja vu. Quote, among people I know, there are SS couples, people who are highly regarded and public-minded. Again, this is Martini here. I have never been asked, and it would never occur to me to judge them, unquote. This is from 2008, people, from a book called Nocturnal Conversations with Cardinal Martini. Creep me out, why don't you?
Have you read that whole book? I've always thought the name is super creepy because it is, but I've never gotten around to reading it, and I should.
Not the whole thing, no. Maybe some Halloween I will.
In what is it? Julia Maloney reports that Bishop and Cardinal Bergoglio. I don't have the same worldview you do about whether or not Pope Francis is Pope, whether Bergoglio is Pope Francis. So when I say Bergoglio, I'm using the term in an equivocal way as to the way you would use it, at least post 2013. I'm saying Bergoglio to demarcate that I'm talking about either him as Archbishop or as Cardinal. I'll call him. I don't, chronologically, I stamp it with Francis after March of 2013. But Bergoglio was a huge fan, according to Julia Maloney, of quoting Martini. Did you know that? Which, Ed, that's what the whole show is about, is that he would quote him previous to becoming Pope. I guess our episode today is really about the fact that as Pope, Francis has continued to be a fan of quoting Martini, who is the mastermind of the revolution.
And that's why, again, people get on our case for criticizing Francis or Bergoglio. But just to throw a factoid out there, the Code of Canon Law for the Church from 1917 to 1982 said that whoever willingly and knowingly helps in the promotion of heresy is automatically suspected of heresy. So we have no choice but to accuse Papa Francesco of heresy, since he's promoting Martini and et al., who are heretics. I mean, you know what I'm trying to say?
Sure. Yeah.
Also, Thomas Aquinas, and this is something that, again, that the Pope's, I've said this before, but it bears reiterating. The Pope's explainers don't seem to understand the principle that St. Thomas Aquinas laid down, that Aquinas says we ought to deem someone good by interpreting for the best whatever is doubtful about him, unless we have evident indications of a person's wickedness. Therefore, Bergoglio doesn't get the benefit of the doubt anymore.
Yeah, I like when you said that to me last week. I liked it a lot. It's a great point, Dr. Mazza, here on Rules for Retrogrades, making it clear that if someone has a track record, then they don't receive the benefit of the doubt, and it's a point that is Thomistic in its origin. I would go to something that's even more foundational, an a priori point about human relations and about the nature of the term benefit of the doubt itself. There has to be doubt that exists before one can confer benefit accruing to it. And when there's no doubt, as things have become crystal clear since 2016, I don't care what you thought about Francis before 2016. I always knew he was bad. I always knew from the day he came out there. I think you're the same, Ed. But guys like us had to wait 3 years or so to really announce it with any kind of "I told you so." But after 2016, there is no doubt. Therefore, there is no benefit to confer because it is not a corollary of any doubt. And what I mean is, after Amoris Laetitia came out in April, and then he quadrupled down on it in September of 2016 and said, "You have the only correct interpretation," to his boys in Buenos Aires. Even Cardinal Mueller says this is a more or less probably formal heresy. One cannot give communion to the divorced and civilly remarried. And whatever lingering ambiguity remained after April was gone by September in the year 2016. So I just don't forget. I'm not a forgetter. I don't forget. And after 2016, it's all over. There's no benefit of any doubt to confer to Francis.
Yeah, and we're just being charitable. I mean, St. Thomas Aquinas says that to remove someone's evil is the same thing as to wish his good. So we're doing this out of love, out of supernatural love, caritas, right?
Of course, absolutely. Did you know that? Did you know, Ed, that this is again reported by Julian Maloney and commentary by Julian Maloney? Basically after Martini fell ill in 2002 with Parkinson's, the same disease that had stricken their nemesis, John Paul II. He'd been ill with it for about 10 years, 9 or 10 years. And they were just waiting for him to die. And it took 3 more years. Parkinson's doesn't work super fast. That Cardinal Achille Silvestrini, one of the other Sankt Gallen Mafia, the one that kind of filled in as the administrative head in replacement of Martini, he was close to JP2. And what he would do that's extra serpentine, so snake-like, is he would go and visit with the ailing JP2, very close at his sick bed, eventually his deathbed. He was one of the last ones to talk to him. And he would snake out information to the media. And he was literally doing this, pretending to be this ailing old pontiff's friend. How wicked is this? In order to give updates to the Sankt Gallen Mafia, because they had toiled so tirelessly, arduously for so many years to get Pope Francis I, whether it was Martini or himself, Silvestrini. I think he might have wanted the pontificate for himself, but they said no. It was, like I said, it was Francis I has to be Cardinal Cormac Murphy O'Connor. But did you know that Achille Silvestrini would do that? How conniving, how canting is that?
Silvestrini is a pimp. He never could have outfought Santino.
Yeah.
He never could have outfought Carol Wojtyła. No, what I didn't know until now is that it was Martini all along. Barzini.
Not Barzini. Yeah. Well, it's like Silvestrini or Murphy O'Connor. I mean, really, the interesting one is Casper, because his IQ is probably the highest of all of the Sankt Gallen Mafia. But he was always Casper's not a pimp. Casper's a brain trust man. He's known as the media sometimes referred to him as Casper the Friendly Cardinal instead of Casper the Friendly Ghost. And he was known in the 90s as a smiley guy, in the early 2000s as a smiley guy. That's not what you think of when you think of your Uncle Franz, Uncle Walter from Germany. That's not the impression Americans have of Germans anyway. Well, and the Italians mistrust him even more than me.
What he was known for was he was at odds with Ratzinger when Ratzinger was the head of the CDF over the notion of what takes preeminence, the local church or the
Right.
universal church,
Right.
right?
Right. Specifically on his Casper plan. Starting in 1993, Casper was championing this plan for the next 12 years. He was embattled with Ratzinger on local church versus, the local parish, the local bishops' conference versus Rome, which, of course, that's a closed question. Rome always wins. Universal jurisdiction. Specifically over the issue of communion for the divorced and civilly remarried. I know everyone kind of knows that. The curious thing is that the first person to issue a paper in favor of such a plan was Ratzinger himself in 1972. Did you know that? That's the weird part in all
Yes.
of this. There are lots of weirdnesses that follow from Ratzinger. I know a lot of people out there don't like the Harry Potter series, but it's funny. Ratzinger's kind of the Professor Snape, where he's a double agent. Was he a triple agent? He was once a lefty, then he became a conservative, but it kind of seems like he was a conservative that was still a lefty. He's the Professor Snape. And he even dies, and you figure this will be clarified upon his death, Joseph Ratzinger's, and it never was, because he's the one who fought Cardinal Casper. I'd always heard that. For the last 5 years. But then I remembered, but he's the first one to author a paper in 1972.
It's true.
Advocating communion for the divorced and civilly remarried. Casper wouldn't do it for 21 years. What do you have some more Martini stuff? I mean, can you tell us? I love your quotes. It was a great spooky Christmas Eve lecture you gave. I had the pleasure of listening to it.
Thank you.
A couple nights ago. It was really well done, and you understood it was Christmas Eve, and people are giving up family time to be listening to your lectures. But give us some more quotes, and if you can, help us understand who Cardinal Martini was.
Right. Well, in my Christmas Eve talk, what I was suggesting is that he's sort of the Jacob Marley to Bergoglio's Ebenezer Scrooge. And wouldn't it be great if the ghost of Martini could appear to him and he could get scared straight and become the Ebenezer Scrooge of Christmas Day rather than the way he had lived before that. But so here's a follow-up quote, and this is from a book called Believing and Knowing, a dialogue between Ignazio Marino and Carlo Maria Martini from 2006. Now, this is Bergoglian in two ways. This guy he's having this dialogue with, Ignazio Marino, is a member of the leftist Democrats, which in Italian politics is the largest communist party in Europe, the Partito Comunista Italiano. I get deja vu here. You've got a prince of the church dialoguing with a known card-carrying communist. That's just like Bergoglio and Scalfari, right? Only this is 2006, and it's Martini and Marino. So he says to Marino, it would never occur to me to judge the SS couples. And he goes on to say, of course, I am ready to admit that in some cases, good faith, lived experience, acquired habits, the unconscious, and probably even a certain innate inclination can push one. I get that innate inclination can push one to choose for oneself a form of living with a partner of SS. In today's world, such behavior cannot therefore be ostracized or demonized. End quote. He goes on to say this. He says, I believe that the family is to be defended, blah, 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 but it's not bad if instead of casual SS relations, two persons should have a degree of stability, and therefore, in this sense, the state could also favor them. I do not agree with the positions of those in the church who take issues with civil unions. I support traditional marriage with all its values and am convinced that it should not be put into question. And if some people of the opposite sex or even of the same sex aspire to sign a pact to give some stability to the couple, why should we absolutely refuse that it be so? End quote. Tim, this is FS, right? This is fiducia. This is Bergoglio all over, but it's not Bergoglio. It's 2006 and it's Martini.
Fascinating. Fascinating. If people don't take literally the claim that the Francis pontificate was fated to be from the 90s, the 1990s, and it was originally going to be this greater sire, Carlo Maria Martini, then all you have to do is consult some of the things that Ed is saying. It was going to be the Pope Francis pontificate. It was just going to be Cardinal Martini as Pope Francis instead of Cardinal Bergoglio as Francis. And this makes it crystal clear. There's also, it's also shades of Pope, was he even a cardinal yet? Yeah, he was a cardinal in 2001. Cardinal Bergoglio in Buenos Aires in 2010, for the first time favoring SS civil unions. There's a lot of confusion about the difference between unions and civil unions. A union's just a couple, a romantic couple. A civil union is basically a legal marriage, a non-sacramental legal marriage. Cardinal Bergoglio in 2010 made it clear publicly for the first time that he did favor worldwide globalization of civil unions in all countries. So that's another Martini-ism. And he had for some time, even though he'd played it otherwise.
And so what that means, if you think about it, both Martini and Bergoglio, before he occupied the chair of Peter, they were dissenters against the doctrine of the Holy Office, the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith. Because I don't know how many people realize this, especially the youngsters. In 1992, the Holy Office issued a document about SS people and unions, recognition of civil unions. And it came out and said that Catholics cannot, I can give you the exact quote if you'd like. It was July of 1992. The Holy Office comes out with this statement, which at that time, Ratzinger was the head of the Holy Office, right? And he talks about the danger of legislation that would give entitlements and rights to people of an SS persuasion. And he says that here's the line here. Where a matter of the common good is concerned, it is inappropriate for church authorities to endorse or remain neutral towards adverse legislation, even if it grants exceptions to church organizations and institutions. The church has the responsibility to promote family life and the public morality of the entire civil society on the basis of fundamental moral values, not simply to protect herself from the application of harmful laws. And also what that document says is that there are cases in which it is not unjust to discriminate against SS people. So when Martini says they can't be ostracized, again, he's going against the magisterial authority of the church in that 1992 document.
Yeah, folks don't understand what discrimination is at law. We discriminate against even reformed felons. They're not allowed to own handguns or to vote. We discriminate against the purported right of all criminals to commit the crime that is relevant to them. So we're discriminating against the right of incest. We're absolutely a lawfare regime of strict discrimination against incest, against trafficking in narcotics, against even some rights that should pertain to normal people once, like I said, the felons get out of jail. So Yes, absolutely. Ratzinger held the line on the SS civil union issue all throughout the 90s, all throughout the early 2000s, or the first half of the early 2000s. Ratzinger was still head of the Holy Office. And then we had the hot potato game of Cardinal Mueller was the Holy Office prefect, and he was Benedict's, and he was Francis's for a time, and then it became Cardinal Ladaria, who was fired for the 2021 document, the March 2021 Dubio Responsum, where he said, no, blessings may not be given. This is the church's timeless teaching. Francis was very upset over this. He was surprised by this, even though his name appears on it, and he undoes it. And but between November and December of last year, you had November, Cardinal, this is kind of funny, actually. Cardinal Ladaria censures the German synodal way, which is just the next generation St. Gallen Mafia. And he's censuring none other than Bishop Heiner Wilmer. And then the very next month, in December of last year, which was momentous, Emeritus Benedict died. And so Francis had to announce, well, I'm going to be replacing the Holy Office prefect. He went the very next month to saying, I'm going to fire the Holy Office prefect, and I'm going to give his job, I think, to the very guy that he's censuring, Bishop Heiner Wilmer. How is there, just let's revisit this point, Ed, and if you have more quotes, I want to hear them that link Martini to Bergoglio and then Francis. But how is there any doubt? Anybody in the comm box, if there are any Pope splainers out there, how is there any doubt to which attaching benefit would be a corollary? I mean, there just isn't. It's like G.K. Chesterton says about Protestants who study history. There are none, because any Protestants who study history become Catholic. There are no Pope splainers who study the history of the St. Gallen Mafia, Cardinal Martini, or the personal history of Cardinal Bergoglio and Archbishop Bergoglio.
Yeah, well, I've got more quotes, but before we get to the Martini and Bergoglian quotes, if we wanted to, Tim, we could go all the way back to the 60s and 70s. And I don't know how many people are familiar with this, but in October of 1976, a month before Rocky premiered in theaters, there was a conference in Detroit called Call to Action. This was a convention. Call to Action convention had representatives to it from dioceses across the country. So these were the bishop's representatives, but often they were picked by the parish council or the bishop's council or this, that, or the other thing. And it was I don't know if you remember the traditional priest, Father Vincent Michelli. In 1981, he wrote the book, The Antichrist.
Yep.
In one of his chapters, he talks about what went on at the Call to Action conference. And if this doesn't sound like the Synod on Synodality, or if this doesn't sound like Bergoglio, then I don't know what does. Let me read to you from what Father Michelli has to say. Quote, "The following are some of the conference's mad demands, which the Catholic Church simply cannot grant without ceasing immediately to be the true Church of Christ. If she granted them, she would become a church of the world, a snake pit of radicals. She would become a center of doctrinal, moral, chaotic disorder, and psychoneurotic distress. This is what the radicals demanded. 1, divorced and remarried couples to receive Holy Communion while still living in adulterous unions." Tim, is this microphone on?
Yeah.
Okay. This is Father Michelli, who was at the conference as a delegate, and he saw what these radicals were demanding in October of 76. Number 2, ordained women priests and bishops. 3, women given the power to preach the gospel with authority. 4, a reversal on the doctrine of artificial birth control. 5, a mitigation of the doctrine on abortion. 6, a teaching approving Marxism, socialism, and pacifism as doctrinally true and morally good practice. 7, a denial of the right to property and to reasonable profit. And lastly, 8, the creation of a new church, democratic, non-hierarchical in structure, a classless church. That's the St. Gallen Mafia platform, 20 years before the St. Gallen Mafia.
Wow. Wow. The communism stuff with the hard C word. You know, we talk about a hard A or a hard R, soft A or hard R. The hard C word, communism, they don't care about the moniker anymore. I know it was a big deal with like the Black Panthers in the late 60s, you know, hippies at Berkeley and stuff like that. They wanted to throw around the word. And then they realized how quixotic and naive and foolish it was to be attached to the term. Same thing as the feminists realized, look, get rid of the F word. Like most women object to calling themselves feminists. And now 99% of women are feminists, but very, very few women compared to the 1960s willingly attach the moniker to themselves. So all of the 2 or 3 bullet points you just read, Ed, where it's like, where it's a creedal affirmation of communism is being required by the radicals. They've gotten more shrewd. Martini might have been the one to tighten things up. We don't need to call ourselves communists. All we need to do are these push button issues that will kick in the communism. So do you agree with what I'm saying there? That's what I noticed when I look at that list.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of folks don't know this. I mean, some in the know this, that in the 1930s, Italian communist Antonio Gramsci was the one who said, look, you've got to Marxize the soul, the culture, right? Divorce, abortion, pornography, right? You got to push the society to become, you know, basically atheist and pagan. Then they'll embrace socialism, right? You go for that first, and then you after everybody's softened up, they'll accept, you know, communism with a hard C in the classical definition of it. But since we were talking about the feminists, let me give you a quote from Martini with regard to women in the church. And again, let the Pope explainers tell us if this isn't Papa Francesco talking. Quote, with regard to the church leadership, I would ask for patience. It will discover more and more of women's possibilities. Things have progressed a lot and will continue to progress, especially if we treat one another as partners. I invite you to take into account that the various churches move at different speeds in this matter. Our church is a little hesitant. In Canterbury, during the 90s, I visited Archbishop Dr. George Leonard Carey, then primate of the Church of England. His church was suffering tensions because of the ordination of women. Now listen to what Martini says. This is the Cardinal Archbishop of Milan, you know, papabile, as the Italians say, right?
Inherently papabile is Cardinal Archbishop of Milan, always position of
he
power.
Says, I tried to give him courage to take a risk. In other words, to go ahead and ordain women that could also help us treat women more fairly and understand how things might develop further. We should not be unhappy that the Protestant and Anglican churches ordain women and are thereby introducing something important into the arena of wider ecumenism, nor is it a reason for standardizing the various traditions. So not only is he pushing heresy with regards to women and ordination, but he's pushing the heresy of indifferentism, which means that you could find the true Church of Christ outside the true church by saying, oh, we shouldn't have a standardization of denominations or whatever.
Well, Cardinal Casper and the Germans have already endorsed intercommunion with the Lutherans. I always confuse whether it's Bergoglio himself. He's made one or two fleeting references to it. Hey, if a Catholic woman with a Lutheran husband comes up for communion, don't deny her. And you're like, well, I wasn't going to. And then he's like, I think if I remember correctly, he did it in 2018. He's like, and don't deny the husband. Just come on. Don't make a big thing of it. And you're like, whoa, wait a minute. You just said he's Lutheran. What? This is also one of the Sankt Gallen Mafia agenda items. And now listen to this. After you read the Martini quote on women, listen to Francis's January the 1st homily. The church needs Mary in order to recover her own feminine face, to resemble more fully the woman, virgin and mother, who is her model and perfect image. It's from Lumen Gentium. And of course, this is a point directly from Anthony Stein. Whenever a modernist is going to say something really heretical, they cloak it in some loving, beautiful phrase about the Virgin Mary so that they can gaslight you later. So I know it's coming. Here's where it is. Who is her model and perfect image, to make space for women and to be generative through a pastoral ministry marked by a concern and care, patience and maternal courage. The world, too, needs to look to mothers and to women in order to find peace, to emerge from the spiral of violence and hatred, and once more see things with genuinely human eyes and hearts. What does that mean? Wait, we haven't been seeing things with our eyes? And I don't know how to see with my heart also, but once more means we need to return to it. Every society needs to accept the gift that is woman. Every woman. We all have to accept every woman as a gift. To respect, defend, and esteem women in the knowledge that whosoever harms a single woman profanes God, who is born of a woman.
Can I interrupt you there, Tim? I'm sorry. Is this the same guy who slapped a little Chinese lady?
Yeah. Yeah, it is. I was just thinking about that. What was that, 3 Christmases ago or 4?
4.
Yeah.
Listen, Pope explainers out there. Watch the video of St. Peter's Square. I think it was Christmas Eve or New Year's Eve. And 4 years ago, he's walking down and he's shaking everybody's hand. And when does he stop? Just before the Chinese woman. Now, I have my suspicions why he stopped, because I think that he knew about COVID ahead of time. And it was in December of 2019 that COVID was spreading where? In China. And now, why do I say that? Well, because Bergoglio in August of 2019 gives an interview to La Stampa in which he's August 8th, 2019. La Stampa asks him, what do you fear most for our planet? What's Bergoglio's answer? New lethal diseases, a drift and devastation of nature that can lead to the death of humanity. So the question is, what did he know and when did he know it about the globalists, right? If you watch the video of him walking through St. Peter's Square, he was shaking every single person's hand. When he saw this Chinese woman, he makes an immediate right turn to get away from her. She grabs his arm and he starts slapping her and doing like that. And he's got the nerve to lecture us about being kind to women.
Yeah, it's profane, he says, to ever harm one woman. He harmed her hand. He slapped her kind of hard. She was tugging at his robe. To be fair, I don't like to pope-splain at all. I'd love to just pile on. She was tugging on his robes pretty hard. That's
true.
But
she was saying something, and I don't know what language she was talking. I would wish somebody could translate what she was saying.
I can.
She
was
like being insistent.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know what she was saying, but anyway.
Yeah, she was speaking Mandarin or something, Cantonese, some China talk, and it was interesting. But she also spoke English. And anyway, it's a good point. I'm glad you made it. I just if we're gonna button up this Martini Francis Bergoglio connection, do you know how long they knew each other, Ed?
No.
Julia Maloney's work tells me, I'm going to read a Julia Maloney line. According to Austin Ivory, Bergoglio used his time in Rome later that year, this is 2001, to reconnect with Martini, whom he had known since at least the mid 1970s. I did not remember that they'd known each other that long. Ivory said, I thought a lot of the St. Gallen types did not know about Bergoglio until the mid 90s. I was wrong. Ivory says that Martini, whom Bergoglio liked to quote, Ed Mazza knows that, then introduced the Latin American to the mafia, initiating relationships that would develop on Bergoglio's fleeting visits to Rome in the next years. This comes from Ivory's book, The Great Reformer, about Francis himself. And Julia Maloney assures us it worked like a charm. So they knew each other well, and Bergoglio liked to quote Martini. People, I want them to walk away from this episode on the Martini Bergoglio doppelgangers knowing that Martini was the original plan. He was the telos for the Francis I pontificate. It would have been the same program, but I think they would have been less encumbered by Bergoglio's unlikability. He's not very likable as a person. And despite the way they tried to pitch him, it's like the way the media tried to pitch LeBron James. They really tried to curate an image for him from the time he was a junior in high school, LeBron James, and they're gonna we're gonna supplant, we're gonna make him the next greatest player of all time. And no one ever bought it. No one with a brain anyway ever bought it. They picked the much less crafty, much less charming Bergoglio to be Francis I and to basically try to destroy everything according to the program you read from whatever that Detroit 60s conference. And it didn't work as well as it would have if it had been Cardinal Martini becoming Pope Francis I. And you have even basically a bunch of Martini quotes out of the mouth of Bergoglio Francis, and it doesn't work as well because he's not as likable. What do you make of that kind of dueling view of revisionist history?
Absolutely, I agree with you. It's like comparing the somebody like, Stalin or Khrushchev with Gorbachev. I don't you probably might remember Gorbachev from your from as a child.
Yeah.
He was much smoother, and but he was still a card-carrying communist. Uh, Even though he said he wanted to reform the Soviet Union, and ultimately it collapsed under him. But it you put a better face on something. But again, I would want to reiterate here just how much and for how long. I mean, I didn't know about the 1970s that Bergoglio knew Martini. But I've got a great quote here I'd like to read. It's from St. Columban of Ireland, and he said this around the year 600 in a letter to Pope Boniface IV, because the rumor was that Pope Boniface IV was favoring heretics. And this is what he says: "I summon you, remove the cloud of suspicion from St. Peter's chair. Call a conference so that you may clear the charges laid against you. For you are alleged to favor heretics. God forbid men should believe that this has been, is, or shall be true. Already it is your fault if you have erred from the true belief. Justly do your subordinates oppose you, and justly do they hold no communion with you. For if these things are rather true than fabled, with changed roles your sons are turned into the head, while you become the tail. Thus too shall they be your judges, who have always kept the Orthodox faith, even if they seem to be your subordinates. But they themselves are the Orthodox and true Catholics, since they have never favored or supported any heretics or suspect persons, but have remained eager remained in eager love for the true faith. So St. Columban says that the true Catholics are those that have never favored heretics or suspected heretics. By this definition, Jorge Bergoglio is not a true Catholic.
By lots of definitions that are non-competing, that are concomitant, Pope Francis isn't a true Catholic, and we don't know what to do with that. So, and it would be the same if we had a Martini pontificate, the way Time magazine, I think, had him on the cover as the
Right.
anti-pope,
The anti-pope, the ANTE.
ANTE, the before pope, the kingmaker. I think there's only so charming one can be before it's just like, oh wow, this guy's the destroyer. He's sent to make a mess. Especially when you go back and you check the tape and you're like, oh, he said that was his goal for the pontificate, is to make a mess. And when you have someone write a book or collocate sources in an article, or to do what you did on Christmas Eve, give a lecture on a bunch of Martini quotes side by side with Francis quotes, then you're like, oh, this has been a design long in the offing, and this is merely the effectuation of it. We're watching the realization before our eyes, and Francis hasn't really sought to camouflage it much. So it doesn't matter how charming you are. You can be a more smooth, unctuous Martini, or a less smooth, less clever Bergoglio. He was still the guy. One thing Bergoglio has, I think the reason that ultimately he was the new Martini, not the Martini 2.0, but the new one after Martini learned he couldn't be Pope in 2002, is his will. He's got an ironclad will, Bergoglio does, and he doesn't back down, which is in other contexts an admirable trait or set of traits.
Yeah, no. I was on the Station of the Cross yesterday with Joe McLean, and he asked me about the quote where Bergoglio says, "I might be the Pope to schism the church."
Yep.
And he asked me what I thought about that. And I said, well, look, let's compare two quotes. One is from Papa Francesco, October 2021. Quote, "There is no need to create another church,
Right.
but to create a different church." Let's compare that quote with one from 20 years earlier from Joseph Ratzinger, August 2002. "The Pope is not the instrument through which one could call a different church into existence."
Wow.
You've got the principle of non-contradiction applies here, don't you? You're the Thomistic philosopher.
Yeah, it has to. Yeah, as far as I can tell. Yeah, that's exactly. It's almost like Benedict knew what was coming. It's almost like Benedict knew, hey, what they're going to try to do is schism without the break, which is exactly what Francis has tried to do.
Yeah, yeah.
Do you have any more side-by-side Martini Francis quotes?
Sure. So I read you the quote from Martini about civil unions, and we got kind of sidetracked because I brought up the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith 1992 statement. But let me give you a quote from Bergoglio about the same topic. Now, according to my research, in 2019, Francesco did this documentary with a Mexican broadcaster, and I think the producer of the documentary, I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name right, was Afanevsky.
Mm-hmm.
Sources in Mexico say that the Vatican cut this quote, which I'm about to read, from the footage that it provided to Televisa after the interview, which was filmed with Vatican cameras. That's from AP News. Anyway, here's the quote from Francesco. Quote, "Homosexual people have the right to be in a family. They are children of God." Now, let me stop the quote. When he says family, think Martini talking about extended families and et cetera, et cetera. Quote, "You can't kick someone out of a family, nor make their life miserable for this. What we have to have is a civil union law. That way they are legally covered." Now, if that isn't word for word Martini from 2006, 2008, I don't know what is.
You're telling me that is out of the 2020 Francesco film? I thought that was in it. I've been citing it as if it's in it. I did not know that that was an
The
excerpt.
source I came across says that they cut that part out of the final edit, I think.
Hold on.
I'd have to research it further, but
No, 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 it's
apparently
fine.
he did say those things because I remember watching on YouTube and seeing him mouthing those words, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, I feel like I've seen the. Let me take a peek.
Yeah,
I have a local news clip for about a minute of some local news I pulled off the internet with pieces of the trailer, and I believe has that. Yeah, so the direct quote is yes, Homo sapien people have the right to be in a family. They are children of God. You can't kick someone out of a family, nor make their life miserable for this. What we have to have is a civil union law. That way they are legally covered. And I fly that on Twitter. It's just a screenshot of the video. Now let me show you. Let me play for you and if you have anything else to say as I find this, Ed, then
sure. Not to lob Molotov cocktails here, but somebody like Blessed John Henry Cardinal Newman said that if a pope starts spouting heresy, he ipso facto loses the office. So I would just throw that out there for people's consideration that when you and I talk this way, people will call us sede vacantists or whatnot. But there are sources that are trustworthy. I don't know if people remember Cardinal Stickler. He was the official archivist and librarian for the Vatican. And back in the 70s, he said, well, if a pope ever said heresy, then he would ipso facto stop being the pope. So by us doing this research, we're just doing due diligence here, and we're just, like I said, we're not quite sure what to do with it, but people shouldn't fault us for trying to get at the truth here.
Yeah, it gets really, really, really close to collapsing the use mentioned distinction. Are you familiar with the old analytic problem of the use mentioned distinction, Ed?
No, what is that?
Distinction in analytic philosophy of language between using a term and mentioning a term. Like if I say brie, the term brie cheese comes from the Gaelic language in 1252. That is just mentioning the term. I'm not using the term. Where if you say I love brie cheese, I'm using it, right?
Ah,
And little kids will famously play on the use mentioned distinction in order to get away with saying cuss words. Like they love telling the favorite thing to tattle on one of their siblings about is if one of them said shit or something like that, because they could say daddy Gaby said shit, and I'll be like, okay, Gaby, don't say shit, because if you there is such a thing that has to be real between the use mentioned distinction when you get into the metaphysics of what language is. I won't get into all the analytic philosophy that justifies it, but the term is not standing for its own quiddity. The term is standing for the signifier for the quiddity when you merely mention it. You can have all kinds of fun with all kinds of naughty words where
well, I could 1 year ago this month, some Spanish seminarians met with Bergoglio, and according to Catholic Herald, every other word out of his mouth was F this, F that. Don't be effing clericals. So, I think the post-planers are trying to say he's got Tourette's. They're looking into it, but
do they really say that,
no,
or they
no, I'm
just
just
don't? They just don't deal with the history. Yeah, no, he's known as crass and foul-mouthed is how he was reported out of Julia Maloney. I'm thinking of her work. It was widely reported crass and foul-mouthed. He's the one that taught us about coprophagia and coprophilia. But my point about the use mentioned distinction, you can have tons of fun with it, is that the popes, like, what I want to know is to like the hardest core pope splainer, whoever it is, Michael Lofton or something like that. At what point, like, these guys are papolatrists. They seem to really worship the Pope. They don't think you can say, hey, this Pope, if you take a truly maximalist view of the pontificate, where like basically, don't ever show the image of the prophet, then if a Pope, as a matter of plain fact, could be demonstrated, that is proven, to have committed some crime in 1975, is it no longer okay to just mention the fact that a Pope committed a crime in 1975? And a maximalist Pope-splainer, a true ultramontane, would say, well, yes, the use mentioned distinction breaks down. Whereas the game that most of the popular Pope-splainers had played until Fiducia Supplicans is, you can, like the ones that are kind of in between Pope-splaining and not, you can mention the obviously wrong things Francis has done. There's a whole litany of these things. But you can't reason any about it, even if you're reasoning in terms of corollaries, because that becomes using the Pope's sins to reason, even if it's like a one-to-one correlation. So it's almost like the use mentioned distinction breaks down when you're talking about Francis's many, many flaws. He was a bouncer at a nightclub as a young man. He's got this weird history in Buenos Aires. He's not a typical Pope in any sense. And, they're like, well, I guess you can always state a fact, right? They don't want to sound crazy. But with Francis, the levels that folks that are holding on to Pope-splaining, the levels to which they're having to go to continue to defend the man, literally is tantamount to saying, you're not allowed to say true facts about the man's life. That's what I meant about use mentioned.
Right.
We're getting into that kind of crazy Protestant characterization of Catholic papolatry that we used to, under Benedict and JP2, we used to say, we don't worship the Pope. Popes can do wrong. Popes can be wrong. Popes are wrong all the time, no sweat. As long as they're not speaking ex cathedra, no big deal. We just say, oh, he's wrong. That's how we defended it. That's how I defended my faith as an undergrad in college, even though I didn't know tons. I knew that. I knew what an ex cathedra statement was. Well, under Francis, it's become true Pope worship among the people that defend him, because it's almost like it's their only option.
Yeah.
Or something.
Which one of the characters in the Vatican came out and said something like, he has his own, we don't have to worry about scripture and tradition. We have whatever comes out of Bergoglio's mouth. I'm paraphrasing. Do you remember which?
That wasn't Tuccio. That was one of the C9 guys. That was oh, no. Was that Spadaro? Not a cardinal at R. Was that Antonio Spadaro?
I'd have to go. Father Z had a blog post on that. I forget
I think it was Antonio Spadaro. Back when he was kind of a thing. He was Francis's right-hand man for 2016, 17, 18. I think that was a Spadaro quote. Hey, I found this, but I agree with the essence of the point you're making 100%. I found this little local news spot on Francesco where they seem to think that the quote about SS civil unions is actually in the final cut. Let's hear.
At the Rome Film Festival, Pope Francis instantly began making international headlines after the film revealed his endorsement of same-sex civil unions, a first for a sitting pope.
This represents an earthquake, a dramatic move over the last, let's say, 20 to 25 years.
Charles Reed is a professor at St. Thomas specializing in canon law, which is made and enforced by the Roman Catholic Church. He says one quote from Pope Francis in the documentary stands out. Homosexual people have the right to be in a family. They are children of God, Francis said. You can't kick someone out of a family nor make their life miserable for this. What we have to have is a civil union law. That way, they are legally covered.
Number one is the urgency of this. He says we have to do this. That adds an element of urgency. And secondly, he is talking about rights. And rights are things that belong to us, legal rights, legal events that we can lay claim to. These statements represent a significant shift in tone and immediacy and urgency, and raising the bar, raising the level of what our expectations should be.
But Professor Reed says because the comments came in a documentary, don't expect to see the Catholic Church to formally follow suit anytime soon.
So at any rate, I haven't seen Francesco, which came out in 2020. It was widely reported, perhaps erroneously, if you're right, Ed, that it was a quotation that made the final cut. Maybe it was pulled out, but at any rate, it's well enough documented that it shouldn't matter. I've been reporting it as if it made the final cut.
Right. Well, Tim, let me ask you: would you say that this is a natural law issue?
Of course,
that Bergoglio is violating not just church teaching, but the natural law itself.
Of course, without a doubt.
Yeah. Yeah.
Kind of the
So he's
natural law.
violating the natural law. He's violating the CDF, stuff that comes out of the Holy Office is supposed to receive our, normally until now, was supposed to receive our submission as being magisterial, right?
Right.
Like for example, the document from the CDF from 1992 says that in reference to SS, one tactic used is to protest that any and all criticism of or reservations about activity and lifestyle are simply diverse forms of unjust discrimination. Anyway, it goes on to say that nobody has a right to something which is objectively sinful. So anyway,
you don't have a right to do wrong, as
yeah.
Abraham Lincoln said. Do you think help us? Have we exhausted all of your side by sides, Martini and Francis? I loved what you were saying about Francis is Sauron and Martini was Morgoth, because Morgoth had more powers than Sauron. Right. Sauron was merely the servant of Morgoth, and even a lot. This is another thing I loved that I extricated from your example. Many of the foul servants of present day late third Middle Age Middle Earth, bad guys who serve Sauron, are actually also, like Sauron himself, lower ranking servants of the original Morgoth. So like when it is as dorky as the conversation can be, but when you meet the Balrog, its full title is Balrog of Morgoth, out of the lips of the elves. So the Balrog is a slightly less, I told you, nerd alert, right? A slightly less powerful servant of Morgoth than Sauron himself. Maybe you think, oh, Sauron, if you don't know the history, the way the Pope's planners don't know the history about Bergoglio, Martini, Silvestrini, Casper, Murphy O'Connor, Carl Lehman, all of these guys, Gottfried Daniels, the one who told on all of them, then you don't know, Balrog's almost as powerful as Sauron. And guess what? Both a Balrog and Sauron, who's only slightly more potent, were both servants of Morgoth. Well, you said that Cardinal Martini is kind of the Morgoth, and a bunch of these people at the service of the Francis Pontificate, Bergoglio Francis, were once kind of brothers at arms alongside Bergoglio, who were kind of at the service of Martini. I love the image, and I've thought about it more.
A shameless plug. You still have a study reading going on, a weekly reading of Lord of the Rings.
Yep. Tonight actually. Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah, thanks. That's tonight at 6:30, and we're in the middle of chapter 11-12 in Fellowship of the Ring, coming up to the end of book 1 there. Yeah, that's tonight. So thanks for pointing that out. We skipped last week, and also am finishing up Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics. Speaking of natural law ethics, you're smart to say that the Francis Pontificate, the Bergoglio Francis Pontificate, only slightly iterated from what would have been the planned Martini Francis Pontificate, is a violation not just of church teaching, but of the unalterable natural law. You get these, I don't know, I don't want to say too much here. You get these theology kids that don't really care for the principle of non-contradiction. And they're like, well, actually, they push their glasses up. Some of these kind of, theology kids that have studied a lot of borderline modernism stuff in 20th century theology, where it gets way too nuanced and hyper qualified and nuanced to make any sense. And they're like, well, 20th century theology actually says, well, the church can reverse itself and blah, 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 blah. And you're like, okay, fine. Let me stick to what I know. The natural law. can never be reversed. Never in a lower magisterial teaching, never in a higher, whatever the difference between the magisterial teachings are. And I know them more than I feign when I know, ought, and you have to make at least 4 categories out of Denzinger when you go through and you qualify the categories of levels of certitude of the magisterium, blah, blah, blah. The point is, you can't reverse the natural law, because then you're going to have, if the Catholic magisterium were ever allowed to do this in a lower magisterial claim, the way Francis has reversed the natural law in lower magisterial claims, then you're having the Roman Catholic Church, the one true faith, issuing out of its teaching office, in its teaching institutional capacity, things more morally lenient than Homer and Hesiod were saying. You get it? So natural law has to just be natural law. We can't suffer, that is, allow the magisterium to contradict itself on natural law, even if it's just the lowest level of magisterium. That's BS. And that's too many nuances. The church has to speak with one voice, or we're less reliable on natural law morality than Homer and Hesiod were, which is absurd. They're pagans. I'll give you the last word, Ed, but this is that time where the church, out of the mouth of Bergoglio, or it would have been the same out of the mouth of Martini, were saying things that are more immoral than the moral figurings of Homer and Hesiod. And that's just pathetic. And I don't know what to do with it.
Well, we're still celebrating the 12 days of Christmas. And our Lord says in the Gospel of St. John, he says, "For this I was born, and for this came I into the world, that I should give testimony to the truth." And he also said about the devil, he said to the Pharisees, "You are of your father, the devil, and the desires of your father you will do. He was a murderer from the beginning, and he stood not in the truth, because truth is not in him." So it's our commitment to Christ as the truth, as he who testifies to the truth, that we have to stick with in the face of whatever comes from that wretched hive of scum and villainy, to quote Obi-Wan Kenobi on the Tiber.
Mos Eisley on the Tiber. Yeah.
And I guess as the last thing, a shameless plug on Martin Luther King Day, Monday the 15th, a holiday, going to be doing a 3-hour seminar, basically an introduction to different facets of the papacy that Catholics need to remember. We're going to go through popes, prophecies, anti-popes. It's really going to be something special. So if people go to edmundmazza.com, they can sign up for that.
Okay, good. Look, man, in such a confusing time, I don't mind. I get this question every time Dr. Edmund Mazza comes on the show. Why do you have Dr. Mazza? Well, I like reasoning together with him. We don't have to agree about every detail. And even saying that baseline foundational principle is insulting to the intelligence of every human being involved in this podcast, you and I, and every human being watching it. I don't agree with everyone about everything, but yeah, it stands to reason that anyone I do have on this show, I agree with about enough stuff, unless it's an outright debate, to make for an interesting conversation. And that's always what I have with you, Ed.
Thanks,
and it's just paltry level stupid when people scratch their heads and can't get their heads around why, after the quality work that we put out together when you come on the show, why do you have Dr. Mazza? It baffles me. It baffles me. Catholics, they want a rule book for everything. We have a pope that thinks that there should be a rule book for nothing. We have a pope that literally wants to destroy the waistline rules and say anyone can do anything with any of their parts to anyone. That's really the goal. And to eradicate the very natural law. And yet Catholics ignore that, or even some of the ones that don't ignore it are like, well, yeah, but isn't there something in the catechism on who you're allowed to podcast with or do a stream with? It's like, Nope. Yeah, I don't know what the Francis pontificate means. I don't believe anyone does in real time. Now, it's the Schrodinger's pontificate. Some people might be proven right, but we don't know until we know. Some people might find that they like calling heads. You go and you flip the coin, you turn it up, and you realize you were right. Some people will be proven right, but it won't be justified true belief that was certain all along. Neither you nor I, if I end up being vindicated about this or that prediction vis-a-vis Francis. You see what I'm saying? So
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, if I'm wrong about something, I hope that you'll persuade me out of it, or somebody else will persuade me out of it. But this much I know. I know that, for example, Cardinal Cajetan, who debated Martin Luther, right? He said if someone for a reasonable motive holds the person of the Pope in suspicion and refuses even his jurisdiction, he does not commit the delict of schism, provided he be ready to accept the Pope were he not held in suspicion. Am I crazy, or is Francis held in suspicion, objectively speaking?
Of course. Well, Michael Matt said this in a stream he did. I just watched it last night, but Underground Remnant TV, whatever it's called. Good stream. He's like, everyone's kind of a trad now. I mean, you have all the world, basically people that just don't like the LMNOP bullshit, saying, I resist this Pope to his face. So we're kind of, I mean, you and I have always been trads, but everyone's kind of a trad now. The Africans were always fine because liturgically it's so weird in the East and the global South that they kind of always had their weird liturgies. But so they were never really trad, just they're very, very trad adjacent on morality. They're the most trad. And so now we're kind of all trad, irrespective of liturgy. And I'm not saying everyone's guess is as good as one another's, but this is going to be an interesting ex post not untangling. I mean, not untangling always happens after the fact, but this is gonna be very interesting to see the way that the Catholic magisterium, and I have every confidence it's doable and it shall be done. I just don't know when shall be done.
And
the Catholic
hope
magisterium will have to give the meta narrative of itself.
Yes.
In the wake of Francis. Go ahead.
And we hope that happens before and not after Our Lady of Akita said that fire is going to come from the sky and that the living will envy the dead. Okay, let's hope it happens before that.
It probably is causally related to it, I would imagine. And yeah, I don't even want to think about that, but yeah, the Akita thing is frightening. And there have been some updates that just it never really gets better. I don't ever want to be envying the dead. And Mary said we'll cut it there, Ed. Thanks. Did you want to call out your event one more time as
sure,
we go?
Thank you. Yeah, the Martin Luther King holiday on Monday the 15th. I'm going to have a seminar for 3 hours. If you can't make it live, I'll send you the video. It's called Popes, Prophecies, Anti-Popes. And basically, we're going to just go through a lot of stuff from papal history that people don't know about, that people need to know about, that will help you to see what's going on today in a more educated kind of way. So just go to edmundmazza.com and you can enroll.
God bless you, Ed. Happy New Year.
God bless you, Tim.
Orphans and retrogrades out there. God bless you all. Like this video, subscribe, click the notification bell. How many times have I said it? We're trying to get to 50,000 subscribers. I say it less than other podcasts, and it irks me to even have to say it, but we're chasing down 50,000 subscribers. I will say this, we're going to throw a party hitting 50,000 because we shill less, we pimp less, we pander less than any other Catholic channel out there. Everyone panders to some group, except for Rules for Retrogrades. Tradcasts pander to trad groups. Normie casts pander to normie groups. I have a track record of not giving a what, and to make 50,000 subscribers on this channel is something we're going to be really proud about, because it is all-time no pandering. Anyone will tell you that. Boy, we will piss off our own audience at a moment's notice if the truth requires it. So 50,000 subs is a joyous thing, and now we're just crossing 49, and it's slow organic growth the way I wanted to do it when I set up this channel. There are guys that know how to play the algorithms, play the algos, and play the pander game, and I'm like, I don't want to do that. I want fast, but I know it'll be slow organic growth. Fast organic growth is slow growth, and that's what we've done. So God bless you all. Please, if you're willing, give to Locals and Subscribe Star if you want to support this channel, because we need it. We need it. It's a bigger name than the subscriber count of the channel insinuates, and we're proud to have it this way, Steph and I. So God bless you all. Be safe. Keep your eyes open. Keep your head on a swivel. Des Volt.